Welcome back to Online Darts, everyone. We're here ahead of Champions Week finals night, and we got Murph to catch up because it's been a while. Chris, first of all, Champions Week's delivered here, hasn't it?
Yeah, best Champions Week we've had so far, best week we've had so far, I think, at the Super Series. Really, really good stuff. Stories everywhere. Luke Little is 16 years of age, doing incredible things. Maybe turning into one of the best performances we've ever seen over a week at the Super Series. But yeah, the Champions Week it's as it should be, and because all of the players are of a standard that has won them a week, we've had lots of drama as well.
All eyes were on a certain 16-year-old heading into Champions Week, and look, we've known about Luke Littler for 2 years, what he was producing on the JDC, and there were question marks. Could he then step up and do it consistently against the men? Group A, he proved what a talent he is, and he is fearless for a 16-year-old kid, effectively.
Absolutely. In that group, actually, Scott Taylor was in pole position and Luke was lurking behind him, playing really well. Taylor slipped up and Luke just pounced, didn't feel any pressure, just hammered through his match, ton plus average, got top spot. I have said on commentary during this week that I'm always sort of reticent to pile pressure on a young player, but with Luke I can't find a doubt. I really can't find one. I think he's the most exciting teenage talent since the emergence of Michael van Gerwen.
I was going to ask you about that, and you kind of covered it there. Are we looking at a generational talent here, do you think, even at this young age? Yeah,
we don't know what's going to happen, and there are things, still growing and life changes that happen when you move into adulthood and all that kind of thing. So we don't know what will happen with him physically, mentally, all that. But if he carries on the trajectory that he is, or even just stays as good as he is, he's good enough to win things, and he's played for long enough in the WDF system with the men. It must be horrible to be a man or a woman on the WDF at the moment, because you've got Bo Greaves and Luke Little are winning the boys and girls titles and the men's and the women's titles over the last few years. But yeah, I haven't seen a player who has got the full package so young like Luke Little has. We've seen really exciting talents, but add in the maturity. You feel like you're watching a 25-year-old, not a 16-year-old.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And touching on what you said there about Bo and Luke, obviously, I was going to do this later, but it's topical, so we'll bring it up now. The Dev Tour, Luke has taken to the Dev Tour like a duck to water, winning events. One negative, were you disappointed not to see Bo play on the Dev Tour?
Yeah, I really wish she would, actually, and I've said it to her in conversation at the Women's Series that I think that's a really good place for her to play darts, because I think that she's capable of winning a Dev Tour title or two, and that would be a great story for darts. It'd be a great story for her, and it'd be great with what we've seen with the women's game in the PDC in the last few years is Lisa and Fallon and a few others, Makuru, Anastasia, getting into tournaments and competing at times with the men, sometimes beating the men, but they've kind of done that cold, whereas Bo Greaves has an opportunity here to play on the development tour for a few years yet, playing all the men that she would be playing later on in her career in the PDC, and I think that's a real opportunity that could be missed if she doesn't play in them.
Yeah, on the Dev Tour, obviously Luke started amazingly well, but it's two Dutch boys that have caught the eye. One that we've seen here in Jean Van Veen that lost in the Euro Tour, went back and won a couple, and the other one that there was always going to be question marks around, Wessel Nyman's return, but there doesn't seem to be any doubting in his own mind of his ability or any rust after serving his suspension.
Yeah, so I'll start with Jan. Again, I first saw him in Southampton, and he was struggling with his throw really badly, but he was still hitting everything, and I kind of said then that I felt he would go on and do great things, and lots of people said to me, oh no, not with that throw, and the winning, the confidence, the freedom, he's got rid of that now, and even if it comes back, he's shown that he could always manage it, so I think he's a real one to watch, and I think he could be up there challenging for big things within the next 3 to 5 years. Wessel's a different one. Obviously, bucket loads of talent. I spoke to him not long after the ban, and it was difficult to motivate himself to play darts much, and he couldn't play darts in much. It was basically solitary practice that he could play in, or little pub events or whatever it was. So to come back at that form suggests to me that he's been quite disciplined. And look, nobody wants to see that kind of thing going on in this sport, but it's also a sort of endorsement of the system that it was found out, he was punished, he assisted the investigation, everything like that, served his time, and now he should be given a second chance, and I'm glad to see him making the most of it.
Yeah, look, there's plenty of darts going on right now, and it's hard to believe the Premier League is almost done and dusted. When we look back to when the Premier League picks were announced, and I've never seen social media blow up the way it did 14 weeks in. One, how would you assess the picks and how they've all done, and the Premier League as a whole?
Well, the interesting thing about the Premier League is that conversation, I think, for the first time has carried on throughout the entire time of the tournament. Every week you're still hearing this player should have been in, this format shouldn't have happened, that kind of thing. And this is not exclusive to this format, so don't get me wrong, it's not a criticism of this format, but I've enjoyed it more recently than I did earlier on. I think earlier on I sort of watched it as a standalone night, didn't really pay any attention to the league table, but as it's developed, seeing like Michael Smith rise up, that battle between Aspinall and Johnny Clayton, and sort of Price suddenly sort of blow Michael van Gerwen away from what he was doing earlier in the season. That's been interesting, but I think it's similar to the old original format, which I liked because players didn't play each other as much. Maybe that's just a commentator thing, because I think those matches are sort of sacred and special, to not play each other 8 times in a short space of time. But even with the old formats, which is one of the reasons they brought the elimination thing in, people remember that, was because for the first sort of half of the season there was little interest in the actual league, and it really reached its climax. So right now I think it's quite exciting and everyone's probably enjoying it, but I also think that we need to remember that wasn't necessarily the same for everyone at the beginning, unless, as has been covered, if you were there, because then it's a fantastic night.
Yeah, on that, is that shown because Michael, as in Van Gerwen, won his 3 nights in a row, and after, I think it was night 5, he told the world, I'm in the O2, I'm there, I'm done, they're not catching me. And since then, he hasn't hit those heights. So like you say there, at the beginning, no one paid attention to the league table, and when you do go berserk like he did early on, is there a lack of motivation? Because there's no bonus for topping the table, so as long as you're at the O2, that's all that matters. And do you think maybe that's something that needs to be looked at to keep the players motivated?
Possibly. I mean, obviously all 8 professionals to go up and they play the best, but I think it can be difficult to be as mentally engaged in what you're doing if you know it actually doesn't matter anymore. So you're in or you're out. Basically, it's hard, isn't it, to stay? We see it here at the Super Series. The players are obviously going up there, doing their best, but subconsciously, if they're already out with 3 games to play, you've not got the same level of mental engagement. So I think that there is that, but that's going to happen in any league format of darts. So if it remains Premier League, then I can't see that changing. But I also do think that he may be a little bit mistaken there, because of the point system with 5 points to the winner. I think it can be misleading sometimes. Like I said, I wasn't paying attention to the league at first, and I assumed that it was sort of no one could catch him at the top, and then 3 weeks later he's second. So yeah, I think maybe he got a bit carried away himself.
This little rivalry that is developing again between MVG and Gerwen Price, we saw it a few years ago, then the Iceman just dipped off a little bit, but he's come back with an absolute bang. This is developing into what could be one of dart's all-time great rivalries.
It is, if we get a period where they're both playing the best together, because we only had it for a few months a couple of years ago, and at the moment Price is playing at a far superior level more regularly than Michael van Gerwen. So it's sort of over to Michael to lift his game, as he did at the Premier League last week. But yeah, I think if we can see a sustained period of both of them in that sort of 103 to 110 range that Price is producing a lot lately, and Michael van Gerwen hasn't produced a lot lately, then we get that, because when you do that, it's explosive, it's exciting, and there's a lot of respect between the pair as well. I really enjoy watching their matches, because I was doing a Euro Tour one recently, and they were just sort of walking off, picking the darts up, throwing again. Price almost like threw one, and I think he caught Van Gerwen. But there was no problem. Do you know what I mean? They want to play that pace, so there's no issue there. It's good for everyone.
You watch, commentate, and just study darts a lot. Peter Wright, are you genuinely concerned for his form right now? Because we know the back end of last year there was a lot going on, and Joe was taken seriously ill, and look, when that happens we understand that family comes first and everything like that, but we're now into May and there's no real sign of an upturn in Peter Wright's form, whether that's on the Premier League. He hasn't done an awful lot of Pro Tours. The Euro Tour, he's losing early. Are you kind of concerned right now?
Yes and no. I think maybe look at it again in 6 months, because, like you said, if there were issues last year that sort of took him away from darts a little bit, stopped him practicing as much as he would like. Peter Wright is a type of player, he's not someone who just turned up and blitzed everyone away with natural ability. It took years and years of dedication and practice to wring everything he could out of his own talent to get to where he was. So if he has a period where he can't dedicate himself as much, that's going to manifest in a longer spell of sort of not achieving, even when he starts practicing again. So if he is putting the hours in behind the scenes now, I think we will see it manifest in a proper Peter Wright later in the year, but I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So there are concerns, but there are also glimmers of hope. There was a Euro Tour match against Michael Smith last week where he had an incredible spell. Could have been 4 11 darters in a row, I think it was 3 11s and a 13 or something like that, and he missed the double for an 11 in that one. So there are spells, there are signs there for Peter Wright, but I think I think we need to see a more sustained period of proper Peter.
On, again, the Premier League, and we saw obviously Nathan's publicly dealing with his issues, and we saw that Glenn had similar issues as well. When there are problems in anyone's game, whether it's a little technical issue or an injury, when you're in this goldfish bowl, it's hard to deal with it, isn't it?
Very hard, and I've got the utmost admiration for anyone that deals with it, but particularly Nathan Aspinall, because there's no real evidence to suggest that it actually affects his performances or his results. It affects him mentally, of course, and the worry that this could be something that really shortens his career or stops him achieving his potential is going to be draining. But look, he does everything he can to try and resolve it, and he's such a fighter, he's such a battler. He's a brilliant darts player, don't get me wrong, I'm not pigeonholing him as just that, but I watched some matches where he just hangs in there, visibly struggling with the throw and everything like that, and must be going through torture, and then he manages somehow to get to a last leg decider and then goes, right, I'm going to just force my way to win this match, and he does. He's an incredible player, incredible mindset, and I just sort of really hope it does sort itself out, because darts is a better place with him at the top of it.
We'll talk about the Euro Tour, and obviously you commentate on it and watch a lot. The Euro Tour seems to have exploded back to life this year, where the Friday afternoon and sometimes the Friday evening was the graveyard shift, that no one really wanted to do it. But we're seeing bumper crowds in a lot of arenas, whether that's in Belgium, Holland, Germany. It really is taken off the Euro Tour, and it's gone to another level in terms of production standard and everything. And the Euro Tour is becoming, I know Dan always says it's the best, but it's becoming the premier tour in world darts at the moment.
Absolutely, and some of the Euro Tour events are not far off what some of the say. Would a player rather win a Euro Tour event or a World Series event? That'd be a good question to ask a professional player, because I'm not sure that they might not say Euro Tour. These are the most important events in darts at the moment, in terms of, obviously, the World Championship's the most important event because that's what everyone wants to win. But in terms of getting to all the big majors, you've got to be in these Euro Tours. So the qualifiers for the Euro Tours on a Pro Tour weekend are actually the most important events, more than the Pro Tours.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because players are openly saying now that out of the 3-day block, that qualifier is more important than the 2 Pro Tour events. And Wayne, I don't know if you don't use Twitter anymore, do you?
I've still got it, yeah.
You're still dabbling.
Yeah.
You see, the point that Wayne made about the Euro Tour is now more important, and it's almost making the Pro Tour irrelevant, and winning a Pro Tour title is now not a big thing and not important to players.
Well, it used to be, didn't it, that you would play on the floor when Euro Tour didn't exist, or it was in its early stages. You would play on the floor to get to a major, and then your first round loser money was more than any other prize money that you could get away from that. But now, £30,000 to win a Euro Tour, which is effectively a tour event. It's still classed as a Pro Tour event. The rankings for the Pro Tour include the Euro Tour. So £30,000 is a huge amount of money, and obviously the bits below that aren't too bad either. But yeah, it's a massive thing now for players to not only earn a decent living, but to protect the ranking, to save the season, and then the opposite counts for the players that don't make it. Very difficult to keep hold of your tour card if you don't make it to a few of those.
With all these different rankings, and we see it at the very top, we know the world's money obscures everything, but even though filtering down, the Euro Tour is obscuring the Pro Tour money. Are we almost at a point where things need realigning because they are all out of balance a little bit?
Maybe a little bit with the major events, and I'm not necessarily saying, I know people are going to say there's no such thing as a major now, but I think that there should be maybe a closer gap between the big majors and the World Championship, and then another level of sort of the other sort of big TV events. With the Euro Tour and the Pro Tour, I'm not quite sure about that, because I do think that the Euro Tour is probably worth two and a half times more than a Pro Tour, which is roughly what it is for the winner. So I'm not too sure about that, but what I think there is always going to be arguments about is the opportunities that some players get based on where they come from for a ranking event. It's something that's not discussed as often as, like, you'll see players who, the Grand Slam's a great example. When that happens, when someone wins a non-ranking tournament and gets into a ranking event, people are sort of up in arms about it. But the same happens on the Euro Tour regularly, where players are sort of put into the Euro Tour based on the positioning, the rankings in that country, or come through an easier qualifier. Although that's been changed for the professionals now because they're all in the same one. But yeah, I think it's maybe looking at how fair it is who gets what ranking points. They've done a lot in recent years to make sure, like, seeds don't get the ranking money, for example, if they lose first round. But on the bigger level, yeah, I do think that it's distorted. I don't like the brutality of the system anyway, personally. I think I'd rather see a system where the ranking sort of depreciates the minute you start earning it, but that's probably another kind of worms.
Whilst we're talking about money and rankings, it comes up a lot, and it's been brought up again recently, is the fact that you don't get anything for losing first round on a Pro Tour. Are we now in a situation where, do we think that needs to change? Because these players have earned the right to be at a Pro Tour by winning their card. So it's not as if it's an open and you've just rocked up, you've gone through Q School or you've gone through the Challenge Tour or the Development Tour, whatever, to get to that stage. But as a new tour card holder, I know that Barry said it before, we'll get better, but you don't got no ranking money, so you're not going to be seeded. So you could be green around the ears. First block of Pro Tours, you could get Smith, Wright, Price, Van Gerwen. So you played four Pro Tours, played top 20 and you've got nothing. And there's no other job really where you'd go to work and not get something. And I'm not saying it should be vast amount of money, but should there now be something for first round losers?
Possibly, yeah. I think it's a strange one. It's a few years ago, if I was asked this question, I was very much of that same opinion. Well, welcome to professional sport. It's brutal. You've got to win to earn money. But the system that the PDC have got in place is a system where they've got this qualifying school and you get this so-called golden ticket. But what does that actually get you? Well, if you don't win any matches, it gets you a lot of debt, basically. I know there's no entry fees anymore, but obviously there are expenses in going to events. So yeah, I wouldn't be against that, just sort of giving a little bit more to the bottom end. Major tournaments have first round loser money, don't they? So it's not an alien concept. But again, they've qualified for the tournament, therefore they deserve a monetary reward. And I think kind of the same as you sort of implied in the question, they've qualified for the tour, therefore they deserve some kind of monetary reward. So I think, yeah, that's probably the way to go, is a kind of nominal fee for first round losers on Pro Tours.
Whilst we're talking about everything like this, it's seamlessly, anyone can plan this. Challenge Tour weekend, and we're seeing the quality in the Challenge Tour now at an all-time high. We're seeing big name players playing in it. Are we now at a point where the Challenge Tour needs to be recognised for what it is as the secondary tour, and more reward put on it? Because 2 places getting cards doesn't really seem fair when the amount of quality is on show there, and it is a perfect feeder to the Pro Tour.
Yeah, and saying that is not a criticism at all. What that is actually saying what you've done has worked. What you've done has got all these brilliant players, strength in depth, but now it's at a point where maybe you need to think about making it a more sort of linear progression. And I know that it might mean that you miss out on a Josh Rock for 1 year, do you know what I mean, or something like that. But those players are much more likely to appear on the Pro Tour through the Challenge Tour. The system I like is still doing Q School. You still get your daily winners that get the golden ticket, but then all of the rest of the places go to the Challenge Tour, so you're getting a much bigger list, 8, 10, maybe 16, depending on how many places are available, and also maybe offering the place a certain number of places to the top player on all of the associated tours around the world, because I also think the effort that they've got to make to come to Q School when they've just played a full season and topped the rankings in Asia or Oceania it's a big risk for them. And also if they play a full season and they know the top of that and they're at the other side of the world, they can start to think about that decision. Whereas a player comes from Australia now and goes to Q School, they get the tour card, 10 days later, the first Pro Tour. That's quite a short time to make a life-changing decision. So I think that needs to be factored in as well. But I think you can keep the golden ticket element, but then reward the Challenge Tour a lot more. And it will also help with numbers. If the Challenge Tour grows to a point where it's like very difficult to run, you could cap that, say at the 256 or even a 128 if that's where they felt they wanted to go. And you've got a Q School order of merit to do that from. And then anyone who doesn't make the cut, well, we'll see you next year. You've still got the ADC to play in. You've still got the chance to play at the ADC Super Series. You've still got the WDF. There's no shortage of places to play darts now.
You touched on that really, really well. Underneath, if you didn't have a card 5-6 years ago, it was a disaster because there was nowhere else for players to play. Now, like you just said there, the strength and depth underneath that elite game is like it's never been before.
Absolutely. And I'm going to add another sort of caveat to what I just said as well. The players that fall off the main tour would go straight onto the Challenge Tour. They wouldn't have to go to Q Schools if they chose not to. Obviously, they could try and get the golden ticket, but they'd still be eligible to play on the Challenge Tour, in my mind. But yeah, the strength and depth is not just in the PDC, but everywhere else. It's remarkable. I mean, even go to a local tournament. Like I've wandered into tournaments around here in Portsmouth, and the players are brilliant, like absolutely brilliant players. There's some of them we've seen here at the Super Series. There's a real buzz around darts at the moment. Young players coming through that are playing an exceptional standard. But yeah, the structures that are now in place so that it can lead somewhere. You're not just going to, if you've got this sort of dynamic, prodigious young talent, he's not just going to his local event on a Wednesday night and then playing his pub team game on a Tuesday night or whatever. He's going and getting ranking points from the ADC, so he might be able to play the Super Series, and then he might get recognised and think about, well, actually I could do the Dev Tour or the Challenge Tour. There's just places to play, but there's also places to progress. On
the ADC route, when the concept Mad all first came out, it was a little bit disjointed, but look, the guys that are running it in, Scott and Adam, Steve and Scott, have gone away. And now they really seem to have nailed it down, that there's a proper structure within the UK that is absolutely blossoming right now. And that's now branching out because we've got ADC Oceanic, Europe. It really is flourishing.
I'm going to say this now. I didn't say it at the time because I didn't want to rubbish something that someone was trying something new. I hated MAD. I absolutely hated it. I thought the concept was a bit too sort of. I don't know what the right word is, but with the belts and it was too. I think it was a bit confused, a little bit sort of confused, and it was, and it felt like as well. All I was really seeing was the belt matches, and it felt like what was supposed to be an amateur darts circuit, but then all I was really seeing was Robert Thornton against James Richardson or someone for a belt. These are established players, do you know what I mean? And I think what they've done now is the right thing. Set up ground level tournaments where people go and earn the right to progress to the bigger stuff. Yeah, of course, if you've not got a tour card, you go and play in those events and try and get to the Super Series, try and get to whatever it is that you can achieve by their ranking system. But I think that it's a much more sort of well-rounded, well-run, and the numbers are showing that, aren't they? That the amount of people that are turning up to play in ADC events, they've built it. And also, what I will say is credit to them as well, because it takes a lot of guts to go, you know what, we've done this, it's not really working, or it's not working the way we wanted it to. So let's go back to the drawing board and see if there's a better way we can do it. A lot of people wouldn't do that. A lot of people would just sort of plough on regardless, stick to their idea and not be pragmatic enough. But they've done it for the good of the game, and the players. So well done.
On that progression loop, and it goes into our point that we've just made a minute ago, could we see a point where you've got Pro Tour, Challenge Tour, and look, we know the PDC have worked with outside organisations before, where the ADC, a bit like the JDC, becomes the feeder into that lower level of the PDC? So there is a progression, or do you not see that?
We could. I just don't necessarily see that it needs to happen. I think there's enough with the Dev Tour, the Challenge Tour, and the Pro Tour for the PDC to sort of manage, and it's not like these players, the same players can play in both, can't they? So you can play ADC and Challenge Tour and Dev Tour. So I don't think it necessarily needs to happen. I think the only way that could really come about is if you're only allowed to play in one, and then that restricts players from playing the amount of darts they can. The only players that really should be restricted are the professionals, and not really for their own good, for the good of everybody else, because then if you've just got professionals playing in everything, then you don't give people the chance to get better, because they're just never winning, because the top players are playing all the time. So yeah, I think it's a possibility, but I don't necessarily think it needs to happen like that.
Just picking this back up as we were about to hit the time limit. The Women's Series about to get back underway again. I know that's something that you've done, everyone.
Yeah, everyone so far. I am going to miss one this year, unfortunately, because it clashes with the seniors event, which I've done every one of as well, so I had a bit of a choice to make.
But we are back, and the first block of Women's Series events this year, we had record numbers, so the women are coming out and supporting it, which is great, because that was always the fear, that it would always capture the top ladies, but the rest wouldn't follow. But they seem to be getting on board with it now.
Passing that 128 mark was a huge thing, I think, for the Women's Series. You've now got the potential for a basically women's pro tour, haven't you, if you've got that level of commitment. We'll see if it continues. I have to give credit to, again, the conversation we just had about the system that's now in place in the general, I won't say men's tour, but in the general sort of tour and the feeder systems like that, is like that because years and years ago, a lot of predominantly male darts players who knew they were never going to be good enough to win professional events supported the tour, and I think that is what a lot of the women are doing now. They've gone, look, we know that we are here, look for a decent sort of day out and might win the odd match here and there against people that are closely matched to us, but we're not going to be Bo beaters, Fallon beaters, Lisa beaters. None of us can really do that on a regular basis, odd match maybe, but we're going to support the tour for the future of the sport, and I think that is a really, really important thing. And every woman that's doing that at the moment, congratulations and thank you to them, because without those people, they wouldn't be the tour, they wouldn't be the platform for the players to go and get 8 women at a world match play, and a couple or 3 now is it at the World Championship. So yeah, I think it's really important that we sort of commend those that are supporting the tour, even though they know that they're not really going to reap the fruits of it.
Well, the race for the women's match play is really heating up now, and I'm speaking to the PDC lads. Tickets are already up on last year for that Sunday session at Blackpool, so the ladies' game is going from strength to strength.
You could make an argument for a 16-player field. So
I was going to come on to that in a second, then, but you beat me to it. That we were doing that. I was looking at the rankings the other day, and I genuinely think for the first time we could have 2 sessions. You could do session on the Saturday afternoon, session on the Sunday afternoon, because the field, the 16 that we could get, would put on an absolute showcase for the ladies.
I probably think the PDC will see it as too early, and I would probably agree. I think you'd rather have a really good 8 than a pretty good 16, and it fits in nicely to that slot. My mum went there last year for her birthday, and she really enjoyed it, and a lot of people turned up specifically for the women's event, which was fantastic to watch, and I was lucky enough to commentate on it on the radio. That in itself, I think, has been a massive breakthrough. But here at the Super Series, we've both done this. We've sat down many times and gone, could we have a women's week? And started making a list. You need 12 players of a certain standard. And when this kind of started, you were sort of, we've got 8, but then the next 4 are maybe questionable. Now we're like, who are we going to leave out?
Yeah.
So it's, the top end is getting more competitive, particularly that bracket below Lisa Fallon-Bow, Makuru, who's one to watch, by the way, because she's got to so many finals and still isn't being talked about because Bow's won them all. But really, at the moment, we might have seen a changing of the guard from Fallon and Lisa to Bow and Makuru in the women's series, which is really interesting. But yeah, below that sort of main 4, the next level has become so much more competitive and they're so much more capable of beating those players and each other. So again, strength in depth is starting, and who knows, in 3-5 years time, maybe there will be a 16-player tournament.
Well, we're talking about the match play. Men's race is hotting up as well, and like we were saying, the players that could miss out in the women's, it's the same for the men. And there's a certain flying Scotsman that has firmly put the cat amongst the pigeons, that we all thought he was going off into the sunset and he'd had enough, but 2023 Gary Anderson has come back with a bang, and from nowhere has catapulted himself back into contention more than contention for Blackpool, because at the start of the year he was so far off on that order of merit, and now he's winning Pro Tours, back on the Euro Tour. Dangerous times if Gary can rekindle that 15, 16, 17 form.
Reminiscent of that time when he lost at the World Championship to Michael van Gerwen in the last 16 from a good position, said that's not happening again, and then went on and won it for the next 2 years. The feeling that he seems to be portraying is one of a man on a mission, particularly making the effort to go to European tours, which nobody thought they'd ever see. It's interesting though, because it's quite a clever move that he's done, because he's backed his talent for so many years that he's been good enough in big TV events to protect his ranking, and then the minute that he started to slip, he went, right, now I'll go to the Euro Tours. He's got 2 years of, if he goes to Euro Tours for 2 years, he's got 2 years of free rolling on the Euro Tour. It's actually quite pragmatic, really. And people say about picking and choosing, he's done that quite well. Look, I love watching Gary Anderson. He's one of the best players we've ever had in this sport, and one of the most easy on the eye in terms of the way that he plays the game. And if he can, he's not quite at the level that he was, but if he can get there, which he's showing signs that he can, then let's throw him into that conversation that we had earlier. Price, Van Gerwen, Anderson, what a rivalry trio that would be. If
you're one of those 16 seeds at the match play, when that draw comes out, you're going to be like, not anyone but him.
Particularly if you want, I think particularly if you're like one of the top 4. I think if you're like, look, I think everyone knows that these days the unseeded players are more than capable of beating the seeds sort of usually 8 to 16, shall we say. Maybe it changes a lot more, but less than the top 4. But if you're but Peter Wright, I don't know what his ambitions will be this year, where he is at his game, but if you're Smith, Price, Van Gerwen, and you get Anderson first round, the pressure is immense all of a sudden.
It's huge.
Yeah,
because
remarkable.
we know what the race, I know we shouldn't, but we look at the tour card race early on in the year to see how they're all doing come the end of the World Championships.
Yeah.
And a first round defeat in any of these what we class as big majors could be catastrophic for where they're going to end up.
Absolutely. Peter Wright's an example. I was looking at his just last week. He's got a lot to defend. He won the match play 2 years ago, for example. He could be out of the top 10 by the end of the year, like realistically, if he doesn't go and probably defend at least one of the majors that he's won. So, yeah, it is damaging, and if you're then told, and in order to do it you've got to get past Gary Anderson first round before you even start meeting the seeded players, then it's tough, isn't it?
Are we kind of seeing a changing in the guard right now? Because like you say, Peter's on the verge of dropping out of the top 10, James Wade is about to drop out of the top 16, he's hibernated in the top 10 for the best part of 2 decades. Are we seeing that changing in the guard right now, do you feel?
I think we are seeing an emergence of 2, not new, but 2 players arriving as the very best in the sport in Michael Smith and Gerwin Price. Van Gerwen's still going to be there. What happened with Wright and others is unknown at the moment, but I think that we've seen these 2 now emerge as main rivals. I hate to say it at the moment, based on form at the moment we've got a big 2, and that's Smith and Price. I think we've got a big 3 really. I think Van Gerwen's abilities without question, and they're the big 3 at the moment, but his form is not as good as theirs. But yeah, so at that level we've not really seen that for a period of time. We saw Wright and Van Gerwen have a sort of period where they were battling it out. We saw Price then emerge, but this sort of, when one went up, the other one dropped, and then before that it was just Van Gerwen Anderson, Van Gerwen Taylor. Always really a couple of players. So I think what we are seeing is a sort of more multi sort of player elite, where you've got, I think, a big 3, but then the ones below them are more than capable of beating them in any given match on a big stage.
Before we let you go and get ready for finals, like last one from me, the seniors, Leonard Gates rocked up to Champions of Champions on a wing and a prayer, because he flew over, not even in the tournament, had to go through that golden ticket qualifier, and was still playing at 1 o'clock in the morning because he wanted to play in the tour events as well. But as a whole, the seniors is really going from strength to strength, that we're seeing now international players travel to come and play in the seniors on UK shores. Yeah,
the Blackpool event was a real buzz. Being there, you were there, fantastic crowd, really received well, fantastic viewing figures, and a fantastic tournament and a fantastic story with Leonard Gates, what he did. I was a little bit disappointed that he wasn't put in the first place, so I was really thrilled when he got through the qualifier, because he performed really well at the World Championship and was probably, apologies Richie, but probably the second best player behind Robert Thornton, maybe standard wise even the best player on terms of but it's about winning, we know that. He's such a good watch because he's just this sort of infectious sort of smiley character, and you don't know what he's going to do because he doesn't. Yeah. And but yeah, the ability to sort of, when he does get it wrong, to sort of work it out and then go, oh yeah, 888, bang, straight in. That's just so fun to watch. But that's what the seniors is. It's fun to watch, and we've got this sort of mix now. So I think the very first event, it was real all-out nostalgia, and then it started to level out now, this sort of mix of the legends and these players that are coming from the tour and actually really threatening. I know we've already seen David Cameron win one, we've seen Richie Howson get to a couple of finals, so I think it's a really good mix. I know some of the players on that tour think that more places should be allocated to them, but I still think that it's in an early stage and it needs to establish itself, and therefore needs the big names to be in the tournaments, and that will be for the benefit of all in the long run.
My pleasure, as always, Matt. We've gone for just over 40 minutes. I know you've got to get ready.
Apologies.
Yeah, it's I could sit and talk to you for hours about that. It's really good, mate. So thanks very much as always.
Nice one, mate. Appreciate it.